Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center technologies. Today's discussion is part 13 of an ongoing series focusing on application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's discussion will be, again, reviewing some AppV components, specifically the sequencer. So here's a bit of an agenda. First, some introductory discussion, which is what we're having now. Next, I want to talk about MDOT itself, just a general overview. AppV itself is part of MDOT. There's a number of other pieces in MDOT I just want to quickly mention so that we know what's there. Brief discussion as a reminder about why AppV. We talked about that in the previous AppV session, but just to bring our minds back to why it's important in a config manager world, a little bit of an architecture review, and then we'll turn our attention to what we're focusing on today, and that is the AppV Sequencer, some general guidance, and then we'll get into a walkthrough, some demo of the AppV Sequencer. All right, so with that in mind, MDOT, just a general overview. So AppV, as I mentioned, is part of MDOT. You will see it there with an asterisk in the list. That's really the one that we care about probably the most from a config manager perspective, but there are some other interesting components of MDOT which are at least worth mentioning. So first, AGPM, Advanced Group Policy Management. Again, probably not something we care about a ton on the config manager side, but certainly useful in your environment. What it does, it allows offline editing of GPOs, allows you to maintain multiple versions of various GPOs, share responsibility for GPO editing, and a lot more, frankly. Those are three of the key ones, but there's definitely more that comes along with AGPM. DART stands for Diagnostic and Recovery Toolkit. And what this is useful for is if you have those machines that are failing to start, it helps you diagnose those systems, repair those systems, recover user environments, diagnose root cause and why that's been happening. Right? MBAM, Microsoft BitLocker Administration and Monitoring. So if you are in an environment where BitLocker is in use, then this tool allows simplified deployment of BitLocker, simplified key recovery, some centralized compliance monitoring, and again, many more things. MedV, Microsoft Enterprise Desktop Virtualization. What this really is, think of this back in the day whenever we first introduced Windows 7, there was this thing called XP mode. And it was all about trying to help organizations that still had legacy applications get moved to Windows 7 quickly by using a kind of a VM spun up through Virtual PC on the backside to run XP and mirror those applications through to the Windows 7 desktop. So they really ran on the XP virtual image, but they were accessible just like any other application on the Windows 7 desktop. That's what this is. The ability to manage this and deploy it, whatever, through the environment. Finally, UEV, so Microsoft User Experience Virtualization. Basically what this is a tool that helps you roam various user settings, application settings, different things as users go between physical and virtual machines, right? Maintain app settings, maintain their personalization and such. So again, just a brief mention of these tools. To tell you what's in MDOT, the one that we care about the most, I think, from a config manager perspective, is AppV, and that's what we'll spend today's session and the next session talking about, is AppV as it relates to config manager. So why AppV? Just a quick review. Right? AppV is pretty critical, or pretty, I wouldn't say critical, but it's very helpful for use in environments. You can certainly do what you need to do without AppV. But AppV brings to the table a good set of efficiencies that will help you manage software deployment in your environment. So, for example, non-invasive application deployment. What does that mean? Well, AppV, applications run in a virtual bubble. They don't see each other by default. Right? They do have full access to the system resources. The AppV client is what manages this virtual environment on the systems. But what that means is you don't really have as much compatibility testing to do, right? Applications run in their own silo, and so they don't interfere with other applications that are installed locally on the machine, installed in other virtual silos and such. That's one of the things that enables the ability, for example, to run both Office 2007, Office 2010, or both Office 2010 and Office 2013. So just recently, on my own machine, I had a physical install of Office 2010, Office 2013 released, and wanted to run that, and there was a virtual option to do it, so I kept both. Right? You can't really do that in physical scenarios. So it really helps ease the deployment of certain applications. Helps even ease the users getting accustomed to a next version of an application, since they have both at their fingertips. AppV also very easy to update and upgrade an application and get it out to the environment. Okay, you'll see some of the upgradability in the sequencer whenever we get to that in just a minute. Fully integrates, leverages Config Manager. So in the Config Manager world, if we already have the infrastructure in place, we already have the clients in place, then it's relatively easy to deploy the AppV client, to use applications developed with the AppV Sequencer and plug them directly into Config Manager and let Config Manager's infrastructure, the pieces that we already have in place, handle deploying these virtualized apps. All right. And we'll see that in the next slide, just kind of the differences between standalone AppV and Config Manager AppV. And then finally, multiple AppV versions supported. So 4.5, AppV 4.5, you can run that through Config Manager. AppV 4.6, generated apps, you can run that through Configuration Manager. AppV 5.0 is included in Config Manager as of Service Pack 1. And we're going to talk about the AppV 5.0 sequencer today in today's sessions. All right. So before we get to that, just a quick reminder of the architecture differences between standalone AppV and Config Manager integrated AppV. So you see I've drawn a blue box around the AppV sequencer because that is the piece we're really focused on today. All right, but just to show, so standalone AppV, you certainly need the sequencer. The sequencer is the piece that helps us build virtual applications. Right? In addition, in a standalone AppV environment, you're going to need a database server for the AppV database, and then you're going to need an AppV management server and likely a streaming server that are responsible for delivering the virtualized apps to the endpoint systems, the client systems, and those systems will need the AppV client installed. So that's standalone, completely without Config Manager. Compare that to the Config Manager integrated AppV approach, and if you'll notice, the only thing that we need here, really, is the AppV Sequencer. It's in common, and the AppV client, that's going to be in common too. The AppV Sequencer and the AppV client, and then the rest of these systems are just Config Manager infrastructure pieces. There's no separate database that you need. There's no separate AppV management server, no separate AppV streaming server. All of it just plugs in. So with the existing infrastructure also leveraging the sequencer, it's very easy to just slide this into your existing Config Manager environment. All right. So let's talk about the sequencer for a minute. So just a few key points that we'll talk about in PowerPoint, and then we'll actually get to the demo. So in terms of the sequencer, just a few things that are worth calling out. So if for those who have been in the SMS world, the Config Manager world for a number of years, you will recall this piece called SMS Installer. So SMS Installer was a component that was around in the days, if I remember right, of SMS 2.0. I think that was the last time. Anyway, it's been a while since we've had SMS Installer. The way it worked was whenever you wanted to package up an app for deployment, it would watch the app install, come up with the changes that the app did to the system, and package those together, and you could deploy that out. Kind of cool technology, right? Well, the AppV Sequencer operates very similarly. It's different in what it does, right, in terms of the virtualized bubble and things. SMS Installer would install the app physically on the box. AppV is virtual. But in concept, it's similar. So what you'll notice in a minute, the AppV Sequencer, in order to prepare the virtualized version of a package, you basically go through an installation of the package live while the sequencer watches it. Okay, and then packages up the results, and you have at the end of the day the virtualized app. All right, so it could be if you have used SMS Installer, this will be very similar, very comfortable for you to see the sequencer. The sequencer upgrade is not supported. Just call that out. We're talking about AppV 5.0 sequencer today. So if you have AppV 4.6 or 4.5 installed, you'll need to uninstall the sequencer and reinstall the sequencer for 5.0 from scratch. Not a big deal because the sequencer is not something that is a difficult thing to uninstall, reinstall, and things like that. preserve, but just to call that out. The sequencer cannot run alongside the AppV client, any version. So again, and this is a good time to talk about it. We'll kind of branch into the hardware, software, and sequencing discussion here. Think about the sequencer machine as, well, it is the box that you're going to sequence all of your apps on. So what that means is you want that environment to be as basic, as pristine as it can be, right? So with the sequencer, the way I use it is just to have the OS installed that I need and the sequencer installed, and that's it. And that way I know whenever I install the app on that box and the sequencer captures it, that it's going to capture every change that I need. So think of it this way. If you have an app that requires that .NET 4.0 be installed, and that app will install .NET 4.0, then you need to let the app install it versus having .NET 4.0 on the box. That way we capture that installation of .NET 4.0. Okay? And conversely, you mentioned here not to have the AppV client on the box. Well, one of the reasons for that is it could create some extra clutter in the environment to have the AppV client running while you're trying to sequence. I'll give as an example the SMS client. So if you have the SMS client, Config Manager client, on the box where the sequencer is running, well, what does the Config Manager client do all the time? It's basically writing to its logs all the time, just checking different things, even when there's nothing going on. So while we're running through the sequencer, we could very well pick up a lot of log file changes, different things that happen on the system that have no bearing at all on the application being installed. So bottom line is, it's best to have the sequencer on a box that is pristine, is clean, and you can use. Now, there are some minimum system requirements, just jumping ahead, for the sequencer box to be able to install the sequencer. And then the applications themselves that you're going to sequence very likely will have system requirements that, or in some cases, may exceed that of the sequencer. So whatever minimum requirements that you have to meet, whether just the sequencer and that's okay for the application, or if the application itself requires additional things beyond what the sequencer requires, you need to meet those minimum requirements and then start sequencing. Okay. In terms of hardware and software, you can do this a couple of different ways. Some folks will use physical hardware to do the sequencing. I like to use a virtual machine to do the sequencing and capture what I'm installing. And the reason why is when you begin to capture your package installation, you want to do that from a system, again, that's pristine. So as you sequence, you're going to sequence multiple apps, 4, 5, 6 apps, whatever it is for your environment as you go along. Well, every time you finish sequencing an app, it's a good thing to do to reset that machine back to base so that you can capture the next app, and then the next app, and then the next app, right? So in a physical environment, that's not as easy. You might have to rebuild that box. In a virtual machine, it's really, really easy to take a snapshot and then just revert back to that snapshot and start again, right? That's what I will do in a minute whenever you see me work through AppV. Then some other considerations here for hardware software. So you'll see guidance that says, if you're going to deploy an application to a Windows 7 box, you need to sequence it on a Windows 7 box. So your sequencer needs to be running Windows 7. Well, yeah, you need to think through that, right? But there are some circumstances, and you'll see me do this in the lab, where I could, for example, very easily capture or sequence on a Windows 7 box and apply it to a Windows 8 image, right? I can sequence on a Windows 8 box and deploy it to a Windows 7 box. It really depends on the application. If you're having problems trying to use the sequenced app from Windows 8 to Windows 7, yeah, you need to think about what your hardware and software base is that you're using. XP to 7, that is perhaps more of a challenge because the underlying OS is different. It really depends on the app. It depends on where the app is being deployed, the different ways it's using the operating system, whether we can capture it and apply it to between XP and 7 without changes, all those things. So just factor it in. Many people get by with using just a single system like Windows 7 for their sequencing, and then that applies to Windows 8, Windows Vista, whatever, right? Windows XP even. But just bear that in mind. Then in terms of the hardware, sequencing is a pretty intensive task, so you do want to make sure that you're not skimping on the hardware. You don't need anything hugely, 16 core proc or anything like that, no, but decent amount of RAM, good fast CPU, good fast disk. Bottom line, you don't want to have bottlenecks while you're trying to sequence. You don't want to have the app hanging up while it's installing because of some slow processor goings on, some slowness of the system. So just make sure you have a decent system that you're using as your base for capturing, for sequencing. All right. So let's talk about almost to the demo, right? We'll just spend a couple of seconds on this slide and we'll move on. So we'll talk about what the sequencer does. I'll do that in the demo. We'll go through some of the sequencer details, and again, I'll go through that in the demo. We'll also spend some time with AppV connection groups, and that's what I tried to illustrate here graphically with PowerPoint. So one of the cool things with that's new with AppV 5.0 is this concept of connection groups. So we talked about whenever you sequence an app and deploy that app, the virtual version of that app runs in its own bubble, and that's kind of what I'm trying to depict here with the squares. So you'll have Virtual App 1 running in its own bubble. You'll have Virtual App 2 running in its own bubble. Those apps, for sure, can see the resources on the host machine, but they don't have visibility into each other at all by default. So, for example, if this were an app that, well, we'll just use our demo. So in the demo, I'm going to sequence up Live Writer, Windows Live Writer, and I'm also going to sequence up a plugin for Live Writer called the Polaroid plugin. If I did these separately, then I would have my Live Writer as Virtual App 1, my plugin as Virtual App 2, and those two would never see each other, and it wouldn't work at all because they need to be able to see each other. Certainly Virtual App 1, the sequencer standalone, would run. Polaroid plugin needs to be able to see App 1, the Live Writer instance, to be able to work, so you run into problems. Historically, the way that you can get around that, and you'll see me do it in the demo, is that you actually sequence both pieces together, right? So you have Live Writer in my example and the Polaroid plugin sequenced in one app together. Well, that works, but it has its own challenges, because if you need to update the Polaroid plugin, you don't necessarily want to have to mess with the Live Writer app and so on, right? So it's nicer if you can keep them separate, but because the bubbles don't talk to each other, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes. In AppV 5.0, we introduced the concept of connection groups. So what you can do is, yes, for sure, sequence these apps separately, Live Writer and the Polaroid plugin, and then through AppV, you can create kind of a bubble, or I'm sorry, a connection group, and I represent that with the red box, that allows these two apps to communicate, right? Creates a connection between these two, and it could be more than two apps that are in their separate virtual spaces, but they can communicate still and be able to work together, right? So in standalone AppV, that's done through some of the AppV management server stuff. In Config Manager, there's ways to do it there that you'll see as we move along. All right, so all that said, let's get to the demo. And so what I'm going to do here is pull in my AppV system. This is a Windows 8 box. Let me go ahead and launch the AppV client. There it is. So we'll go ahead and launch that up, and we're going to walk through just a couple of demos. And just as a reminder, so what does the sequencer actually do? Well, there's several things. Certainly, it sequences apps. We're going to see that happen in just a minute. We've talked about the fact that whenever you sequence apps, that the way it works is it actually watches what happens and captures those results into the virtualized equivalent, and we can deploy that. Once we have the application captured and ready to go, then we can use the sequencer to do a number of other things, such as edit the package that was created. I'll show you how to do that. There's other things like updating the package, using package accelerators, and so on. So let's just walk through this a bit. So on the first screen here, you see that on the Learn About, there's some access to different documentation, the sequencer library, the superflows, if you really want to understand how the sequencer works, some white papers. In the community, we have links to the AppV forums We have some sequencing recipes that you can tap into. We have the package accelerators. So this is worth talking about. So package accelerators, as you're sequencing various packages, these are pre-configured pieces that others have done, could be third parties, could be Microsoft, could be members of the community, have done to help you in sequencing that particular app. So if you were to go to this link and look, you would see package accelerators exist for things like Adobe and Office 2010 and different things, right? In fact, I have one right here. This is the Office 2010 package accelerator. Now, this was a package accelerator built for AppV 4.6. And if you go out to this link as of this recording, you will see really there's nothing out there yet for AppV 5.0. But it'll be there, right? And so I can't really demo the package accelerator to you in the AppV 5.0 sequencer because the 4.6 version isn't compatible with the 5.0. But I call it out because it's worth knowing about. So not only can you tap into the community's pieces for the package accelerator, you can build your own, and that might be something you want to consider storing in case when you build it, it's built according to your standards. You want to store that back out in case it ever needs to be sequenced again. You have that accelerator to start and help you get that done, right? So that's certainly something you can do with the sequencer. Here's the blog link, and so on. And so here's your main page for the sequencer. You can start and create a new virtualized application package. We'll do that in a minute. Or you can modify an existing, and I'll show you that as well. All right, so let's walk through just a couple of different scenarios. So the first scenario that I want to walk through is talking about how we would go through and sequence the LiveWriter and the Polaroid plugin. And I'm going to actually do those together. Okay, so I'm going to create a new virtualized application package. And I have the ability to create a package or create a package using that package accelerator, which is, if I had one of these, I could pull it in and just start to use that. So I'm going to create it from scratch. And now it's going to look at my system and find out, is there anything on the system that should cause concern? Is there anything you need to do? So what you'll see in a minute, I'm going to go back through this, and you're going to see that it'll warn me about a few things, so I'll show you that in a minute. But things you would expect to see here, for example, if you have antivirus software running on the box, it's going to call that out. Because antivirus software, you don't really want to capture that when you're sequencing, right? You want it to be as pristine as possible. So I'll come back to this, but right now we're good to go. All right, so I'm going to click Next. So now I have a couple of choices. So I can choose to do the standard application. That's what I'm going to do for Windows Live. I can also choose to sequence an add-on or a plug-in, which I'll come to that in a bit, or middleware. So think of it this way. You can sequence your standard app, something like Excel maybe, right? And then if you have an add-on or a plug-in to Excel, you can click this option and it will walk you through what you need to do in the environment to capture just the plug-in. Or if you have something like Java, middleware, something that you need Java in place to run first, you can capture that up and handle all those scenarios. So, but what we're going to do again, in order, we're going to capture LiveWriter and the Polaroid plugin in one virtual package first. Then we'll capture it separately. So we'll capture the LiveWriter in its own package. We'll capture the Polaroid plugin in its own package and have them separate, right? And do that as we walk through it. So let's do the standard app first. So now I've got to give it what the installer is. So basically I'm going to point to my executable here on my desktop, and there it is. Open that up. So also notice this is select the installer for the application. I can choose that option, and that way AppV Sequencer will launch the setup for me on the next screen, or I can just say I'm going to do everything custom, and I'll just launch and install whatever I need while AppV is watching and keep track of it that way. So whichever way, this works for now. So click Next. Now I've got to give it a virtual package name, so I'll call this Windows Live Writer and a Polaroid, if I can spell that right, Polaroid plugin. All right, and then this is a very important thing to get right. Okay, so when an application installs, there is going to be a base directory into which it installs. You need to know what that base directory is going to be, and you need to match that. So in many installs, whenever you're running through the installer, it will tell you what the base directory is going to be. You can go with that. You can change that, whatever. It's fine to change it as long as you accommodate that in the sequencer, right? So for example, if you had 2 drives on your systems and you're going to redirect the install to drive D, then that's fine. Reflect drive D on the sequencer, but you also need to make sure you have a drive D on the sequencer to mimic your environment. Okay? So in my case with LiveWriter, this actually doesn't give me a choice where to install it, but I know where it's going to put it by default. So I'll go ahead and just point to that directory, actually create it first, and then I'll start the process. So if I go under Program Files x86, it's going to use as a base directory a folder called Windows Live. All right. So we'll hit Enter, select that folder, and click Next. All right, so now the installer is, or the sequencer is running through and getting ready to launch the setup. So it's going to watch now. So the setup should start in just a minute. Get a little bit of an error, that's fine. Windows 8, move on. And here comes the setup for Windows Live. Watch that for a minute. Okay, so now I'm just going to remove everything except Writer for this example and click Install. So now we're going to go through and you're going to notice that we're downloading different items from the web. Okay, so and that just illustrates it doesn't really matter where the source comes from so much as it does seeing what's happening on the box during install. Okay, so we're just downloading from the web, installing components. We'll be done here in just a minute, and we'll then move on to also include the Polaroid plugin. So we'll just let that run for a minute and come back once it's finished. Okay, so just about done, and there it is. So I've got some configuration to do. I'm just going to take these items off, continue, and then the installation is finished. Okay, good enough. So now what I could do at this stage is say, okay, I'm done installing, and that would let me move to the next page. Or in my case, I want to also install the Polaroid plugin. So if I have an additional install or executable files to run as part of this, then I can go ahead and run that now. So I'll just click Run and go to my desktop and choose my Polaroid plugin right here and run that. Okay, so again, that's going to launch. And we'll wait for that. There's the warning again. Go ahead. All right, next. Next. Oh, and notice, by the way, that the directory here, I do have choice over, and it's using Windows Live Writer plugin, so that's fine. This is my base folder. It's already configured in there, so no problem. Even if I had not created this yet, it would create it on its own. But anyway, so you see that it's in the same place. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. And off we go. Should just take a second or two. As soon as this progress bar shows up, yeah, there it is. Okay, done. All right, so at this stage, I've got LiveWriter installed. I've got my Polaroid plugin, so I am truly finished installing. So I'll click Next. You're going to see that it's collecting system changes. What actually happened to the system? The file system, the registry, all the different areas, services, those kinds of things. And I get a screen now that asks me, do I want to run the program before I finish capturing it? So let's talk about this for a minute. And this really doesn't really apply as much to Config Manager, but it's certainly worth talking about. So what this is asking you, so whenever you run a virtual app the first time, it's going to need to deploy to the client where it's running, right? We're going to have to copy those files down to the client. The virtualized package is going to have to copy down to the client so that we know how to run this thing. Well, some of these virtualized packages, like for an Office 2010 or something like that, can be fairly large. So you really would like to optimize the user's experience and allow them to launch the app and start working while other pieces kind of load behind the scenes. You can optimize the load order, if you will, by test running your app. so that we know what pieces need to be prioritized in the download to get the user up and running while we still continue to download things in the background. Again, not as valuable in Config Manager because of the way Config Manager works, but certainly valuable in standalone AppV if that happens to be a direction you're pursuing. So we'll go ahead and test run it just to do it, right? So I'll just say run selected. There could be a couple of different ones here if you had several applications sequenced into the same package, but I'll just run it. So we're launching it and seeing what it takes to actually get this thing launched. And it'll come up with some configuration screens here in just a second, and I'll just go ahead and cancel out. But at least this gives the sequencer an opportunity to see what it took to get it launched the first time and prioritize that. So I'll cancel. Right, and I'm done. So I test ran the application. I'll click Next. We're going to gather any system changes as a result and move on. So a couple of warnings, or one here, about some files that are excluded from the package and such, verify functionality. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. Some things are excluded from the package. Some things, generally, that's not a problem. But if you need to include, if you need to make sure these files are included, you can go into the editor and override this warning, the exclusion. But it's fine without it. And this is trying to again keep your package as pristine as it can be. Okay, so all right, cool. Oh, and before I move on, let me just show you this. So if you highlight this and double click it, it's going to show you what was actually excluded. It's going to tell you how you go back and include it if you need to. All right. So in this case, I don't need to, so I'm just going to click Next, and I can further customize, so optimize the package for deployment, or restrict operating systems or whatever. This is allowing me to go into the editing section for the package, okay, which I'll do quickly to walk in and show it to you. Right, package editor. Okay, so this is the streaming section again, and then yes, and then here's the selecting application operating systems and so on. There's other options in the editing section that I'll show you in just a minute, but at least here you can specify those things during the sequencing process. I'm going to create the package, put it on the desktop, and create it. And there it is. Okay. Cool. So again, there's the warning and so on, and we're done. All right. So now I have a virtualized app. Well, let me look at this for a minute and just show you what it contains. So first of all, it contains a report of the sequencing process that I can open up in IE, Notepad, whatever. Let's see, turn on WordWrap. And I can read through this if you want to read through it. Let's see if it's even, it should be hopefully better if I go into IE and read it. So if you want to see the results, you can come in here and look at it. Yeah, it's formatted better here. And all the things that happen and so on. Right? Here is the actual virtual package. Here's the equivalent Windows installer file for this. And then here we have the XML document for, let me expand this, for your deployment configuration. Right? So if you look down into this file, you're going to see how the application actually will be deployed to the system. So let's open that with IE. You can scroll down through it and see the different settings. And sometimes you'll have to come through and edit these, though hopefully not much. And then finally, here's going to be a user config document for how this is going to work. Okay. And same kind of deal. It'll just show you the different configurations. You might have to edit these in some cases and so on, but that's all here. So this section of files taken together is your AppV package. Right. So this is Windows Live Writer and Polaroid plugin combined. Okay. So let's go actually try to sequence another one. This time we're going to sequence the Polaroid plugin separate from, I'm sorry, the Live Writer software separate from the plugin into separate AppV packages. So let's go through and create a new virtual application package. So again, I'm going to create a new package. And whoa, you remember that prepare the computer for creating a virtual application package screen? Well, here we have some problems now that we need to resolve. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't proceed. If we see these and we are okay proceeding, then it'll let us do that, right? But this is happening because I have already sequenced the app, a previous app on the box, right? So if I double click on it, again, it tells me what I need to do to get around these problems. Here's again, after you create a package, you should reset the system, just like we know, right? So let me go through that process. I'm going to pause the video. I'll revert the system back to starting point, and we'll pick up. Okay, so I'm back, and the system has been reset. So now let's go create the virtual package again. Again, I'm going to create sequence through just the Windows Live right now and move on. So I'm going to do a standard application, all right, and select the installer. So this is exactly like we did before. So feel free to fast forward the video if you don't want to see this again, but it shouldn't take us long. So I'll just pick the installer, open that up. So this time it will be Windows Live standalone. Okay, and the primary directory again will be the Windows Live directory I need to create. There it is. I'll select it. And next. Okay, so waiting for the installer to kick in. All right, here we go. Okay, so let me roll through this. There's writer. Okay, so install. Let's go ahead and do that. So like before, we'll just watch it install from the web. Nothing new and exciting here, but just so you can see the whole process, I'll let it run. And I'll just pause here actually while it's installing, and when it's closer to done, I'll come back like before. Okay, very close to the end of the install now. Okay, done. So like before, we'll just clear these off and consider this done. Cool. So now I'm just going to say I'm finished installing because I don't want to install the Polaroid plugin at this level. So it'll go collect my system changes. I'm not going to test run it this time just because I don't need to for this. And I'll just continue on. Okay, some files again excluded. We can look at that by double clicking if we want to, but we're good. So I'm going to say go ahead and stop now, click next, and save the package out. Okay, so I'm going to create that. So here it is, getting created. Okay, so as soon as this is done, so I've just captured Windows Live standalone. So now what I want to do is go create and capture my Polaroid plugin. Again, standalone. So I'm not going to revert the system. You could, and in some cases should, revert your system now, but for time's sake, I'm not going to. But I'm going to go back through, create the virtualized app, create the package, and again, I get some warnings here. Okay, good enough. I know that I previously deployed the package. In this case, it's okay. And I'm going to click Next. And this time, I'm going to choose an add-on or a plugin and point to the install source for that plugin on my desktop. Open. Next. And notice now it sees that I need, this is a plugin, so I'm going to have to install the primary parent program. So either I can go ahead and install it myself, which it actually is installed because I just sequenced it, which is why I didn't revert. Or if this is a pristine system, one that I reverted, whatever, one that maybe I sequenced the primary app some weeks ago and I'm just doing the add-on now, whatever, I can point to the package, and I could do it here too, right here, and tell it open, right? And it would go ahead and open and reapply standalone. So that's what I'm doing. Again, it's not going to hurt anything for my lab. And I'm good. So whichever way you go, whether it's manually installed there, whether you do it at this stage, or whether you expand the package you've already previously created, whichever, it's fine. Just when you're done, this should be checked to say I've installed the parent program. Click Next. Now, like before, we need to figure out what the name is going to be. So this would be Windows Live Writer Polaroid Plugin Standalone. And I've got to browse to the directory that I want to watch for the install. So Windows Live Writer is already there. I just put it there. And so I should be able to browse to that directory and see it. So I'll just say look at Windows Live again. Or you could drill in further. You can go on in and say here's Writer. So I'll go that far, whatever. Select the folder, click Next. And now we're going to launch. And here we go. Okay. I'll just take it just a couple of seconds here. We'll be done and have this created. There it goes. Close. All right, so I'm finished installing. Good to go. We'll analyze again. Again, I won't test run. Cool. Yeah, I'm going to stop now and save the package out, create. And there, sorry, this was a plugin, so there was no option to test run it. Yeah, good enough. So it's, I must have missed something there because it didn't create it. That's okay. But you saw the process, right? So now, what happens? So I've got my two applications, my standalone Live Writer, my standalone Polaroid plugin that I have in my system, and I can work with both of those separate, but join them together so that they can see each other in a shared virtual environment. You'll see how to do that in just a minute when I show you the connection groups. But we talked about there's an ability to edit the applications through this to be able to make changes, whatever else. So let's click on Modify. So I have my standalone here. I'll go to the Config Manager server in a minute. I'll have versions of these I've previously sequenced, but I'll go ahead and modify this one for now. So I have the ability to update an existing package. That'd be something like apply an update, a service pack, that kind of thing. I can edit the package, or I can add a new application. So this option would be if you don't want to do it standalone in separate virtual silos, but you want to combine. So say, for example, I wanted to combine the Polaroid plugin with this existing package. I could do that at this stage, right? Select an existing virtual application package. Let's go do that. Here we are. Open, that's fine. Open, next, right? And we're going to get some warnings here, and then I go back through the wizard, and I'll just put something there to move on. Oops, well, I've got to browse to it. Let me just do it real quick. Okay, and so on. We're going to start the installer and whatever. So it is a similar, different pathway in some ways, that kind of thing. So I'll just go ahead and cancel at this stage because I'm not really wanting to add it. So I'm going to cancel that as well. So then the third option that we didn't look at here, the middle one, is to edit the package. So if I need to make a change, I can do it manually. I can maybe look at this after it's been sequenced and so on. I can see all the details. Now this one's not hugely interesting because it's kind of small, but I'll open it nonetheless. Edit. And so it's going to open up our editor. So we can look and see, the name, the version, all the GUID information, the deployments, what platforms we're allowing. So this was an option we saw during sequencing that we could do. The change history for the application. The virtual registry settings that were looked at, captured. In this case, nothing really. Package files and things that we looked at during install. virtual services in the advanced mode and different things, right? So you can get into the editor, you can make some changes and different things. So for example, if I wanted to come in here and add a particular area or delete or edit a particular section, I can do that. If I want to come in and look at the registry and make an addition, add a new well, let's see, different things. No, so well, I'm not able to add the key. Interesting. So I don't have anything really to mess with. So I can't really edit anything here like I have files. So if I would have captured registry, I'm sure those would work just fine. I was thinking I could add something manually, but it doesn't seem to work that way. Anyway, so that's the editor function. Okay. So now that we've got these packaged, right, you've seen the sequencer work a couple of different ways, then let's go talk about how we go put these into Configuration Manager. Okay, so let me pull in my Configuration Manager infrastructure. And again, this discussion is really focused on the sequencer, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the Config Manager side. That's for the next session. But you'll notice that I have my Config Manager versions of these applications already imported. So I've got a couple of these, and frankly, I was thinking of using these for the next session for demo. I'll probably do some other packages just to make it a little bit more interesting for the demo. But you see I have some configured for no connection groups, some configured for connection groups, and different things imported. Another thing that I have here, so I have the full version with LiveWriter and Polaroid plugin imported as well. But notice this. I've also got the AppV 5.0 client that is configured as an application. And if I look at the properties of it, I've got a dependency from my AppV deployments to my package here. So for example, you'll see that these Windows LiveWriter, Polaroid plugin and LiveWriter with Polaroid plugin, those have a dependency onto this application. Well, this is a really good strategy for using AppV and Config Manager. If you're going to deploy a package that is virtualized, it is going to require that the AppV client be on the box. As long as it is, we're good, right? But if you try to deploy a virtualized version of a package to a client and the AppV 5.0 client is not present, then we have a problem. So what you can do is for every virtualized app that you have, you can create a dependency on your AppV client app, and if it's not there, at runtime we'll go ahead and install it on the fly, okay, so that we don't fail, we actually work. You'd rather it be there to start with, but it's better to take the couple of minutes to install the client during deployment than to get a failure, right? So you can do that by linking this all together and so on. All right, so you see these up here. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on them. I will show you that with Service Pack 1, we can go create an application, and here we have a few choices that are new. So here's the AppV 5.0 choice. So if you're going to be building an AppV 5.0 package, you should choose this one, and then point to the content, and off we go, right? Okay, so good enough. So these are already configured, and we'll leave that for now because, again, this is mainly focused on the sequencer. But I want to show you this, AppV virtual environments. Okay, so I mentioned being able to connect up standalone environments. That's done through connection groups, and the connection groups are manifested in Config Manager through AppV virtual environments. So you'll notice right here, I can add another group, so I can have as many groups as I need, kind of talking between each other and configured here. But in this case, I have my first group that allows these two applications to talk to each other. So in my group 1, I have my LiveWriter Polaroid plugin with my connection group enabled, and I have my Windows LiveWriter standalone connection group enabled. So because these two are in the same connection group, they see each other. They will work, right? I'll show that to you in the demo in the next session. But that's what these are. Right? So good enough, and that kind of rounds out what I wanted to show you in the session today. So next time we'll talk about the Config Manager specific side of things, kind of walk through how Config Manager works with this thing called AppV. in terms of deploying content and in terms even of some other pieces too. So we will wrap today, and we'll see you next time.